Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and construction expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living it. Real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast that deals with the Palisades fire and the rebuild. I'm journalist Joel Pollack with technical construction expert Ron Goldschmidt and all-around entrepreneurial great guy Oren Ezra, and we are here. You can reach us at pod@threehomelessguys.com, and of course find us on threehomelessguys.com and on our YouTube page. And guys, this has been a rather interesting evening for me because I had to put out another fire in the kitchen of our new rental, which I'm still learning how to use. And it's just part of the byproduct of moving from place to place all the time, this new sort of existence we have. But I'm here with 4 kids. My wife's out of town, and our nanny is helping with the baby, which is great. She's doing a great job. This was 100% my fault. But I was busy making dinner for kid number 2, and I had to fetch kid number 1 from a friend. And normally in our old house with our nice little toaster oven, you would put the chicken nuggets in the toaster oven and forget about them because it had a timer. And I put the chicken nuggets in this oven, and it did not have a timer. So came back to smoke and all kinds of stuff. So luckily everything seems to be okay, but it wasn't fun. It was not fun to have to deal with
Something's following you. Something's following you around, Joel. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, let's just take a moment before we talk about the news and introduce our incredible guest, just to talk about the unbelievable stress of this whole situation. And I keep saying I have it better than 98% of the people in Palisades because I still have a house. Technically, I was there this afternoon. Maybe that put me in the wrong mood because we were meeting this industrial hygienist. Let me tell you my little insurance story. So we've often said that it's a little tougher if you still have a house to deal with the insurance company than it is if you don't have a house, because if you don't have a house, they sort of pay you out theoretically. And if you do have a house, you've got to figure out what they're going to pay for you to do with it. So my insurance company, which I haven't really named on this podcast yet because I don't really want to go to war with them, although that could happen, but they told me for weeks that they were waiting for a report from the mitigation company that had come to inspect the damage. And after weeks of being told this, I decided to get a little more assertive and find out what was happening. Long story short, the mitigation company had sent the report more than 2 weeks before. So the insurance company was saying they never got it. It was sent 2.5 weeks ago. And meanwhile, we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then we get told we need this other report from an industrial hygienist who comes to my house and looks for lead and asbestos or whatever, but then says, it's going to take 3 or 4 weeks to get the lab results back, not for the lead and the asbestos, but for the 17 heavy metals you have to test for. And endless nightmare, just endless. And we're looking around the property, and the house looks nice from the outside, but the power lines don't look so nice because they've strung up these really ugly cables to replace the ones that burnt or were fallen or whatever. And it's just not a happy scene. It's not a happy scene. It's just not. And then our friend Jamie Page, who is a great journalist from the West Side Current, asks me, hey, have you seen this story about the guy in the LA Times who says he's going to build an 8-story apartment block on the site of the old Shell gas station? I said I hadn't seen it, right? We hadn't seen that picture. She mentioned it to us. And I found that article this evening, and it really set me off because there's this guy in the picture. He looks like he's trying to play the part of a real estate mogul on television. And he's in this bad suit, and he's at the Shell gas station that exploded during the fire. And the funny thing is, I actually saw this guy during the fire when I was able to go in there. I don't know how he got in there, right? Because it was either police, firefighters, or journalists. And somehow this guy shows up with his brother or relative or something, and they're driving in a car. I don't know how they got in. They talked their way past the police or whatever. Maybe they were important enough to get in. I have no idea. I had the sense meeting them then that they were just kind of a little bit full of themselves. But, whatever. I wasn't judging them. It was a weird situation. And now the guy wants to build an 8-story apartment building in the middle of downtown Pacific Palisades in the Village. There's no way that would ever look good. But the LA Times tells us that it's wealthy people in the Palisades who oppose the project. It's not wealthy people. It's people with eyes. Like if you can see, that that's not going to work. And what's frustrating me is that what we've all talked about here, the trouble with debris removal and the backroom backstabbing between Karen Bass and fired fire chief Kristen Crowley and Rick Caruso versus Steve Soboroff and all this stuff going on. And there's no leadership. So when there's no leadership, you have all these crazy ideas crawling out in the vacuum. Like, let's put an 8-story apartment building in the middle of Palisades Village that's going to block the view for the homeowners and ruin the view for anyone driving in from outside. And we're told that we're a bunch of wealthy, spoiled people if we object to the obvious idiocy of this plan from this kid who's standing on the ruins of a gas station in a crumpled suit without a tie, trying to look like a big shot. And I just lost it. I just lost it.
Joe, I think you're taking everybody too seriously. You're taking this guy too seriously.
Maybe, but it's.
I want to play shortstop for the Yankees. Doesn't mean it's going to happen.
I know, but the fact that I don't want you to play shortstop for the Yankees doesn't make me a sore loser. That's kind of what the LA Times coverage was. Anyway, let's go over a little bit of other news that's happening. Some good news. So the Pacific Palisades Baseball Association kicked off last weekend. And actually, the New York Times did a great job covering it, how the baseball league is really bringing people together. They had a beautiful opening ceremony in Cheviot Hills, national anthem, pancake breakfast, kids played. It was amazing. And another piece of good news that I received today was the robotics team at Marquez Charter Elementary, where my kids have gone, qualified for the World Championships, which is amazing.
Wow.
And the amazing thing about it, aside from the fact that all the kids are displaced and the school burnt down in the fire, is that the robot was destroyed in the fire. The robot that they use in this competition was destroyed, and they had donations of different parts and things they needed to rebuild the robot. So these kids and their teachers put together a World Championship qualifying team, and it's just fantastic news. It just shows you the community is continuing, even if the hardships are also continuing. And maybe these are small hardships in the grand scheme of things, but it's starting to get a little tough. But that's the news. You take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. And with that, Ron and Oren, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's been my day.
You take the small wins. I'll take any small win these days. I'm loving the homeless robot story as well. It's great that we're getting these under our belts because we're gonna need them. And as we talked about last week, like momentum does count. Like the small wins do count. We need to see movement, and I just want to say, like we were talking pre-show about some of the progress or lack thereof that I see on PCH every day, and I drive down PCH every day. And the first couple weeks, I saw like movements, some bulldozers, some bobcats, like shuffling in and out. I haven't seen that lately, and I'm a little concerned about it. I'm wondering if like we're losing the momentum that we never had, but we at least like seem to have had at some point. And I want to see that changing. And I know that we just need to keep on pushing for that to happen. I don't know exactly where the stall is, but I haven't seen a lot of activities in the last month or so. And I think we need to string together some wins, small wins, and let's get this thing going because we have a long rebuild ahead of us.
Yeah, I think that we had a discussion earlier today about all the conspiracy theories and do we believe them, we don't believe them, and I think what we mentioned is that like one thing that we should see in order not to believe all this conspiracy theory is that somebody is really helping us rebuild, and I don't see any serious help coming from like the city, the county, or anything. I haven't seen. We still I think since our first episode we mentioned that like Ventura County gave debris removal protocol after a week after the fire they had over there. Over here, it's still like now apparently it's getting better, but we're 2 months later, and we're not sure yet. So that's I think something very concerning. Another thing that I saw today, I saw all the drone videos of all the debris in the ocean, in Malibu, in Santa Monica, all the debris just like sitting over there. And I have actually in front of me a picture open of PCH and all the houses over there. And I'm asking myself, a couple of D9s could like probably, I don't know, like get 10 D9s and clear all this debris before all this rain would have come, and you would solve it. I know a couple of people that worked on D9s. I don't understand. I don't get it why it haven't been done. And there is like some great ideas. Maybe if we'll have time later on, we can talk about it. Ron has an idea of maybe how we can solve a lot of the issue of the debris really quickly. And then when we were talking about it right now, before the call, Joseph said that, and Joseph is, by the way, today we're 4 homeless guys, and we'll introduce Joseph in a second. But Joseph mentioned that like there is probably going to be somebody that doesn't even live here, probably out of the state, some activist that will say, hey, no, you cannot do this solution because Ron's idea is to take the debris through the ocean. So I think there is like so many amazing ideas, so many amazing things that can happen, and I'm asking like, who is the person that can come up, take responsibility? And I think we talked about it in the last episode. Who is the person that can come up, take responsibility, and really make like make decisions that will help us rebuild and make Palisades and Malibu stronger, quicker, faster, and that we don't need to spend all of our money, all of our saving, everything we have, and be out of our houses for 5 years.
You know, it's wonderful to at least be able to bring something positive out of this whole situation, which I think is a greater understanding of our community and how it's working. And, you know, you just reminded me of something positive, talking about the lack of leadership. I mean, we do have Lindsay Horvath coming on the 6th of March to talk to us, which is just 3 days from now. And so we can ask her about the debris removal in the county. So people in leadership positions are talking to us because we're talking to the community, and that's a good thing. And the community is starting to get organized. I went to a meeting on Zoom anyway with some of the block captains of Palisades, and people were talking about how we're going to work together to bring experts into the process and to make sure that we rebuild in a sensible way. And I was just really impressed by the degree of organization that people are doing by themselves, without top-down instruction, without any elected officials involved. It's really great. I mean, if the Palisades has a chance to come back, it's because of that. It's because people are getting together and using their skills and their connections and their resources, which doesn't make us wealthy people who don't want an 8-story high-rise in the middle of our town. It just makes us resourceful people who have made this a successful community and don't need to apologize for it. So with that, maybe we should bring in our guest, because he's going to have some really important legal advice about the issues that we're going to face as a community and as individuals as we deal with the rebuilding effort. So let's welcome Joseph and give him a proper introduction. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to introduce Joseph. Joseph's a longtime friend of mine, and is really a triple threat for this scenario. A, he's a longtime resident of Malibu and was displaced by the fire. He lives in our neighborhood. His kids go to school with ours. He's been really impacted by this, just like all of us has. Like as Oren said, we're 4 homeless guys tonight. Secondly, he has a unique legal mind. He is an adjunct professor at Pepperdine, and for real estate and related matters, property related matters. He's also been a member of several property and real estate focused firms. And the third thing is he's just an awesome guy. So welcome to the show, Joseph Soleiman.
Ron. Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Oren. Thank you, Ron. Honored to be here. Joel, you touched on something. You touched on the resilience of our communities, the resilience of this Marquez school and bouncing back with the robot. I think that's a wonderful metaphor for what the Palisades and Malibu and Altadena, for that matter, is really about. And I think this is about the grit of a community and the ability of communities coming together and pulling through in spite of and despite there being hardships, and maybe in spite of there not being sufficient governmental assistance and political support. So happy to be here, honored to be here, and looking forward to this episode of your podcast, which I'm a listener of, and I appreciate being here.
Thanks, Joseph. And can you tell us maybe like how you were impacted personally before we dive into all the legal stuff?
Sure. My home was like all of yours in the area of Malibu that saw probably about 90% of the homes burned down. I am, like Joel, I would argue, one of the lucky ones. My home did not completely burn down, but unfortunately was impacted by the fire. I was in a strip of the neighborhood that miraculously the fire seemed to skip over my house. I did have some damage related to the home notwithstanding, and like all of you, I'm going through the processes from the environmental issues, from the insurance issues, from the SBA issues, and all around, and trying to figure out how to navigate through things.
Awesome. And can you, like, I think we're getting a lot of questions just to get the legal conversation started. We're getting a lot of questions based on, what people saw happen during the Woolsey fire. Can you frame this for us of what is different about this fire than the Woolsey fire? What is similar? What can we learn from a legal perspective from the Woolsey fire, and what happened with like the lawsuits and just kind of the legal ramifications of how the fire was started and what the investigation found, and just from a legal perspective, how you see the differences and between that event and ours.
Sure. There being a liability, who do we hold liable for these fires has to do with really a unique concept in the state of California that doesn't really exist in the rest of the country, having to do with the concept of inverse condemnation. And that typically is a legal process that allows owners to cover the compensation from a governmental entity or semi-governmental entity like the public utilities when their properties have been damaged. So for that reason, Woolsey was somewhat of a straight shot of a claim for liability for those who were damaged by the fires in Woolsey, because the culpability could be drawn to Southern California Edison in that situation, leading to the damage, leading to the fire that was the cause of the damage to those properties. And inverse condemnation is a strict liability matter. You don't have to show the elements of the tort. It's there if it's deemed that, in fact, that public utility caused the damage to your property. What's different now, fast forward to the Palisades Malibu fires, and to distinguish it also from Altadena for that matter, that we've had ATF come out to, as you guys know, to Skull Rock to investigate, the potential origins of the fire, and we haven't had any determination as to what it is. I think we've You touched on it earlier, or are we talking about um, someone causing the blazes intentionally? Are we talking arson? Are we talking about, we saw images of people during the Kenneth fire who, were able to catch a guy who deemed it appropriate to go torch, the side of a mountain. I think a lot of people have suspicions that arson could have been a cause. A lot of people don't know. There were rumors of, fireworks left over from, a couple weeks prior that were put out, but maybe not fully put out, and the winds really just brought up all that. And yet, at the same time, we know that Southern California Edison, which does service the Malibu side of the Palisades fire, versus the WP, which services the Palisades side of the fire. At least on the Malibu side, I know firsthand that we still had electricity, running up as the fires were blazing in our neighborhood. So, was Southern California Edison at fault? Was DWP at fault? Why were electrical lines still, active while the fires were ravaging? Without the causation as to what the genesis of the fire was for Palisades, it's going to be very difficult to really find that cause of action for all of us, right, against someone to hold responsible. As opposed to Altadena, which in their situation, Southern California Edison was already deemed to have been culpable. The liability has already been assigned, and there, it becomes a matter of really showing the damages. A complete set of circumstances that are different, which is why I think, as relates to the Palisades fire and as to holding someone responsible, we're all kind of still on a wait and see. There's innumerable law firms that are trying to and are working to kind of get names registered so that they can go after someone, but in short, the claims are not quite ripe yet as it relates to the Malibu and Palisades fires.
Wait, Joseph, so you're saying that you have to have a cause of the fire before you can go to court, because they may never discover what actually caused the fire, or they may come up with a set of probabilities where they say, well, it's 80% likely that it was a burn scar from January 1st caused by some people, we don't know who they are yet, but people who set off fireworks behind Skull Rock. That fire was put out. There was nothing done to arrest anyone at that time, but 6 days later, when the wind kicked up, the smoldering remains of that fire became the blaze. Maybe that's an 80% probability, and then there's a 10% probability it was set deliberately by someone, and maybe a 10% probability that some of the hikers who took the early video were smoking, even though they claimed not to be smokers. Maybe they were smoking marijuana or whatever it was they were smoking,
Right.
and they set off the fire. I mean, I don't know which of these explanations is going to turn out to be correct. They don't seem to know. I called ATF last week, and I used to see them investigating, and I saw them at the Malibu Incident Base Camp with the other firefighters or the other emergency personnel, and they were very secretive, but they were doing something. And I called them last week and I said, hey, what's going on? Why don't you have a cause for the fire? And they came back and told me, look, this is a serious investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. We're working hard on it. We have nothing new to report. And I said to them, in this absence of any kind of detail that you're prepared to give to the public, people are coming up with conspiracy theories. I have people around me who believe that Mayor Karen Bass was conveniently out of town so that somebody else could start the fire and she'd have plausible deniability, and then the city and state were deliberately and willfully negligent in a way that would guarantee the Palisades would be wiped out so they could move low-income housing into the area, which, lo and behold, somebody wants to do. They want to put up the 8-story building, and so they could get everybody hooked on social welfare payments from the government and expand their power. That's the theory, and it's crazy, or maybe not, when you start to look at how much negligence there was at every level. And you don't have to believe the conspiracy theory to realize that there are some serious problems here. Are you saying they can't go after any of those problems? The LADWP for not filling the reservoir, and the LA Fire Department for not pre-deploying the firefighters, and the LA Police Department for not having traffic police. You can't go after any of those people until ATF comes back and says, "Oh, we think it was a kid who was smoking pot." That's what you have to wait for.
Well, Joel, first of all, you're touching on the problems of being in a social welfare state. Okay, number one. So, yes, all of these mechanisms seem to be feeding this um, theory, conspiracy or otherwise, that's very conveniently, forming the story as to how our communities are becoming communities where we've got to build. If we're building, we've got to build for low income and accommodate low income housing. If we're going to build, we need to increase density. If we're going to build, we need to provide, um, you know, uh, access to people who don't have the ability to drive cars or have the wherewithal to purchase cars. So what we're talking about is a very political issue. We're talking about a a city, a state, a county that's been a uniparty, single party state, county, city for a very, very long time, and that has been governed by people who are, we talk about, national politics going in a very populist direction, but in a very blue state way that is socialistic and not capitalistic, and it's a convenient conspiracy theory, but it's not a conspiracy theory at all. It's what we've all been unfortunately working with politically and have created. We've created this beast. And what I was alluding to earlier has to do with legal theories that allow, plaintiffs' firms to really be successful in claims against, the pockets that are available. And in the state of California, the convenient party to go after are the public utilities that have, in some cases in the past, like in Woolsey and in Altadena, been known to cause these incidences. It would be wonderful to be able to go after our mayor, who I think was derelict in her duty by being all the way in, a foreign country, having nothing to do with Los Angeles or Los Angeles governance. But sovereign immunity really, doesn't allow for those kinds of causes of action. What it does allow for, and this is where I think legal world issues coincide or collide perhaps with politics, is we need to vote these people out and get people who are more, attuned to the issues that our communities demand, attention to.
Well, we could do that, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just want to stay away from politics a little bit on the podcast because we have an audience with different views about some of these politicians and parties and so forth. But,
By the way,
there are socialist, hold on, just to finish the point, there are socialist societies that do a better job of fighting fires. This was not a choice of capitalism or socialism or left or right. Having traffic police to guide an evacuation, it doesn't seem to be a real difference between left and right. It's just basic stuff, and we didn't have it. And police officers told me it was because they were detailed to protect President Joe Biden, who was in town at LAX, and he was there to visit his great-granddaughter or whatever it was. But, okay, well, why don't we have a plan for evacuation? I was up in the Highlands 2 days before the fire, and I'll say this and then I'll stop talking because I know I've said a lot, but I was in the Highlands 2 days before the fire, and my mom was with me. She was visiting from out of town, and she said, it's very nice up here, and it is very nice up there. And I just said to her, well, I wouldn't move here because there's only one road in and one road out, and it always made me nervous because I was conscious that emergencies happen in California. I'm not the only person who thought about this. Somehow we didn't have it organized. We didn't have a plan. Whether it was the mayor's job or our job, I don't know, but there was no plan. So that's a problem. And as you say, when you're talking about legal cases, you've got to go after people who can make you whole. And we know that some celebrities have sued LADWP over the reservoir and so forth. And LADWP has retained some very expensive legal counsel to defend against those claims. So let's talk about what needs to happen. You mentioned the ATF investigation, but what are the elements you need in place before you can try to go to the legal system to get compensated for what happened? Because a lot of people are going to have to do that. You might not want to participate in these class action lawsuits. I certainly don't. But many people are going to get insurance payouts if you still have insurance. That's another legal question. Can you go after the insurance companies? But let's say you get some insurance. It's not going to be enough to rebuild in many cases. So how do you make up the gap? And many people are going to try to do it through the courts by suing. So who do you sue, and what needs to happen before you can sue?
Right. Well, I'll say a couple things. First of all, these would not be class action lawsuits. They would not be mass tort lawsuits. Again, Woolsey Fire, they were basically lawsuits because every individual set of circumstances are slightly different. They're effectively like an administrative process where all of these disparate claims are brought together, and usually by one particular magistrate and one judge who actually hears them, which is what happened in Woolsey. And basically, bigger is better. So if you align yourself, a couple things. It cuts both ways. I say bigger is better, but is it really? The big firms that represent, let's say, 200, 300, plaintiffs really get to control the claims against the party that would be held liable. As I said, in the Woolsey Fire, the utilities were the target. In this context, who would you want to bring action toward against? You'd want to bring it against the city. I hear you loud and clear. Do you bring it against the police department because they didn't have enough, police officers? Do you bring it against the fire department because we didn't have, fire? First of all, we didn't have firefighters at every corner, stopping this, or the water not being there, the reservoir not having water. I mean, there are so many governmental missteps, and yet you really can't, legitimately go after those parties from a culpability standpoint. This idea of reverse condemnation is there, and that's what makes it easy from an elemental standpoint not to have to provide the elements of negligence, for example, right? That there's a duty of care that was breached, and that's as a consequence of that duty of care, there were damages. You can go.
Let's
Wait,
talk
so
about
let's
it
can I?
a little bit more about the inverse condemnation,
Yeah.
because from my when I'm looking at it, I'm paying taxes for firefighters to be able to protect my house, right? And I know as a fact that there was no water. They couldn't, even if there were firefighters that wanted to protect our specific neighborhood, they didn't have water, so I can't expect them to do anything. Now the brush was not cleared in the mountains surrounding our neighborhood, so that's another thing. As of police, when we left the neighborhood, they all directed us into the Palisade. The Palisade closed the road. My family got stuck in this crazy black area, and it was scary for a moment, and they blocked the road to Malibu, and there was only one policeman over there that, thank God, that he had common sense, and he said, okay, let's open that, although they told him to close this road, let's open that to have everybody run away from here. But those are exactly the things we're paying taxes for, and nobody took care of them. So don't we have a case as a community, everybody together, that no water, no brush clearing, we didn't have enough police people to clear the people. What's our options there?
So
What's the legal perspective on that?
I don't think that we would be able to sue the police department. I don't think that you can sue the fire department. I mean, you can. I don't think you're going to be successful. You're not.
Is there a constitutional problem with that? Because some of these government bodies might have sovereign immunity. So when you try to sue the state of California, you don't really get anywhere.
That's right. I mean, that's the issue. Everyone wants to. I've heard a lot of people, saying, we need to bring action against the mayor, the city council, even though the city council really has limited action and, responsibilities, against the county. And that's one of the things as well. One of the reasons for a lot of this disconnect has to do with things that were well-intentioned, things like, CEQA. You hit on, for example, Oren, that the hillsides haven't been cleared up brush. Well, that's because every time, in the past, we've had fire departments wanting to do that. You would have environmental activists bringing in claims to prevent some kind of cleanup from happening because people didn't want the smoke or maybe endangered animals being burned in that burn process. So it is a problem from an yes. Number one, there's sovereign immunity. We unfortunately can't go after these governmental actors. Number two, we've got well-intentioned, laws on the books like CEQA, which actually work oftentimes against best interests of property owners. So I hate to say it, I'm a surfer. I grew up on the water. I grew up, being very pro-environmental, but environmentalists are not necessarily friends of property owners. So you've got this conflict between environmentalists' interests and property owners' interests.
But they're not friends of the environment. And if they think they are, they can just go on YouTube and look at the videos of how the oceans look like today. And it's worse than I think it ever been over here in Malibu and Santa Monica.
That's right. The surf was black, literally black. The first, week and 2 weeks that I was at the water, looking above,
Wait, are you one of those surfers on the Instagram video who goes out and surfs the
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 debris.
debris? I saw this Instagram video of these surfers. I mean, the surfers will do anything. I
Well,
surf very badly, but I have a kind of admiration for people who do amazing and risky things like surfing and riding motorcycles and things like that. And yeah, surfers were out there. I don't
yeah.
know.
I will not go out there because now I have kids and I know better than to do things that will, cut my life, expectancy. But what we're talking about is, to Oren's point is correct. I mean, you've got well-intentioned, people who want, environmental preservation, clean oceans, and the like. And we, as a state, we've passed things like, CEQA and the Coastal Commission Acts that are intended to provide access and to provide, the most pristine environmental resources possible. But oftentimes, those good intentions go against actually, the interests of people. Just
Do you want to just give a little background? I mean, CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and it was, and I say this as someone who admires Ronald Reagan, it was one of Reagan's most, shall we say, difficult legacies because he was governor when he signed it into law, and it does prevent a lot of things from happening in California. You might say it protects the environment. And I have to say, the first time I ever came to California when I was a kid, the air was a lot worse than it is today. I mean, we've had a pretty smoggy winter, so this winter hasn't looked so good even before the fires, but generally I think the air is cleaner in California than I remember it being as a kid.
well, that's not
And
because
so there've been some, yeah, go ahead.
but that's not because of CEQA. CEQA, yes, CEQA is again a great example of a statute that's well intended and well intentioned, but CEQA in today's era is really used for NIMBYism, for people who do not want things to go up, and so
Not in my backyard, right?
yeah, NIMBYism being not in my backyard, correct. So for people, who ironically, who may not want that 8-story apartment building going up, will say, well, this is going to bring a lot of cars and a lot more people into the neighborhood, and that's going to be bad for the environment, and use it as rationale to actually prevent from housing to be built. So there, and by the way, there are there's Representative State Representative Scott Wiener from San Francisco actually just proposed a new environmental a new statute that would basically amend CEQA that would reduce some of the abuse and delays that have been caused because of these NIMBYism, lawsuits by way of CEQA. And so it'll be interesting to see if that goes through, but effectively it would allow housing that is, to go into urban areas to be exempt from CEQA objections by kind of these NIMBY type claims. So there's a lot happening there. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be something that's going to help us, but it's very asymptomatic of why, when Governor Newsom came out and said, okay, we're going to do two things. We're going to put a stop on CEQA, and we're going to put a stop on Coastal Commission approvals being necessitated for these rebuilds, provided you're only building 110% on your same footprint. So those were acknowledgments, effectively, that these two elements, CEQA and the Coastal Commission, really drags on our ability to, effectively, quickly rebuild.
You mentioned Newsom. So when I was in law school, way back when, one of the things we learned when it comes to negligence is that if something happens and then someone takes some kind of action after it happens that's designed to prevent it from happening in the future, you can't necessarily prove that they were negligent because they're now doing this new preventative thing to mitigate the harm. So I
Because
thought
the
about that
duty
principle.
didn't exist.
What's that?
Because the duty didn't exist at the time, right?
Right, the duty didn't exist at the time. But here's the question. I thought about that when Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency on brush clearance, okay? So 2 months after the Palisades fire, the Eden fire, he declares a state of emergency on brush clearance. So now we have to expedite brush clearance and suspend all the regulations and Coastal Commission and CEQA and all that. We just got to go after the brush and protect California communities and the environment and all that. And many people reacted by saying, oh, gee, now you're going to do that. And now you're going to tell everybody how you did it. But you didn't do it before the big fires that burned through so many tens of thousands of acres and destroyed so many thousands of homes. And maybe you wouldn't be able to sue him because action that you take to mitigate future harm doesn't necessarily prove that you failed to fulfill your duty beforehand.
Correct.
A lot of people are still going to feel like, there's a cause of action there if you can go after the state. And again, I'm not an expert on sovereign immunity and the 11th Amendment and all the other things that play into whether you can sue a state for negligence. But you're talking about this inverse condemnation times of a kind of lawsuit. And maybe just get into that a little bit more. You're not directly suing the governor or the state in the same way that you would sue in an ordinary tort case, but you're basically saying they're failing to provide services, and so effectively they've condemned your property and they've taken it, and therefore they owe you some kind of compensation. Just explain how that works, because it can be kind of difficult.
So the idea of inverse condemnation comes from an eminent domain concept. Eminent domain being a circumstance where the government has the right to take private property for a public good, provided the government pays the private property owner what's deemed to be fair market value for the private property interest. Inverse condemnation kind of takes that and puts it on its head. And again, it's unique to the state of California, where it basically allows private property owners to go to a governmental or quasi-governmental entity and claim damages for their property being taken without compensation. So that's kind of a remedy of sorts that comes, again, where often it's applied is in the public utilities against the likes of Southern California Edison or DWP. Now you hit on something as well, Joel. You hit on these clearing out these hillsides, right? Ironically, a week after the fires, Plumas County, which is up in Northern California, had a 200,000 acre forest treatment that they were going to undertake to basically clear out and do some deforestation. And guess what happened? They had an environmental group bring a lawsuit to stop what would have been the largest ever fire prevention project in the state. So it's, again, environmentalists, well-intentioned, but not really, doing, I think, the people of the state favors, because what, as we all see, has happened, devastation, largest fire in California history with the largest damage in dollar amount, $25 billion. because, again, environmentalists believe that it's against the environment's best interest for us to do these fire prevention projects in our hillsides. It is what it is.
Where is common sense? I'm thinking about it while we're talking, and for the last, I think, 5 years, we've been producing sunscreen, and you guys know it, Joseph and Ron, and we've done only like clean sunscreens, and only because we really wanted to make sure that we don't hurt the reefs. And when you use like a non-clean sunscreen, like is being forbidden in Hawaii, it's staying over there and it's going to the reefs and stuff. And it's like it's been so hard. It's so hard to do it. There is so much regulation to do it. It's so hard to bring out a new sunscreen to the market, and FDA and inspections, and like tons of money we poured on it. And now, like, you know what? I feel stupid that we did it. I'm looking at the oceans right now.
Well, that's a great example. That's a great example. I mean, that was mandated by the state of Hawaii. First of all, you had to have zinc-based sunblock, right, Oren? You could not use. It had to be zinc-based because that was deemed to be safer for the environment and for the reefs. But it's questionable whether it's actually better on your skin, right? I think it's
basically this. We can go into it, but my like concern is like, okay, there was a fire that could be prevented. It didn't. Nobody prevented it, and after that, we had a whole month almost to clear the debris so it won't go into the ocean. I've been driving on PCH like not every day, but a lot. I haven't seen even one piece of equipment on the beach trying to clear the debris. Not even one piece of equipment, So where is it? Until now, I haven't seen. I don't know, Joel, Ron, Joseph, have you seen any piece of equipment on the beach, on the beach itself, trying to clear the debris from the houses that got burned over there?
No, but I do have an interesting story to tell. I had a lot of what we do requires us to act collectively for the betterment of us, as a collective good. Like Joel, my home is standing, albeit it's been damaged, and I still filled out the right of access documentation for the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to access my property. And the reason I did that was because the more property owners contiguously allow for the Army Corps of Engineers to come onto the properties, the more effectively they can come in on a economies of scale basis to be able to do the clear out. That is my individualistic community thinking about how this process should or maybe will work. And I know that in the background they did make some phone calls to me asking me, well, why don't you want your foundation removed? Well, because my home is standing, number one. But number two, that tells me that there is some homework that the Army Corps of Engineers is undertaking as they're going through and trying to figure out all of the right of access ways. And remember, the Army Corps of Engineers is dealing with private property interests. They are not able, imagine the government going onto your property, just like, you have to have a warrant for search and seizure. You also can't go onto someone's private property without having the right of access, especially when you're talking to about governmental parties. So with that, I suspect that there is some, coordination happening in the background. I don't see it yet in our neighborhoods. I don't see it in the Palisades. I don't see it in Malibu. I don't see it on PCH. But I suspect that there will be some much more kind of coming in the near term. Maybe I'm just an optimist, but I do think it's coming.
Let's shift gears a little bit and ask about a question that a lot of folks that are underinsured or had their insurance canceled straight up by some of the insurance companies, and that is, they're relying a lot on the Commissioner of Insurance to try to bring up their claims, maybe retroactively cover them. What standing do you think that they have, and do you think ultimately any of these attempts will be successful?
What I do know, I don't know if the attempts will be successful. I actually think that what will happen is And I know that some insurance companies have done this, that they've stopped, you know, they've actually retroactively reactivated some of those policies that they were looking to cancel as early as, you know, a couple of weeks prior to the fires. So there is a public relations component here more than anything else. There's no legal, you know, component, and that's one of the interesting things here, right? So we've got fair housing laws that basically prevent redlining. We don't have laws that prevent insurance companies from redlining neighborhoods, which is what's happened to all of our neighborhoods, right? I had State Farm. I know, Joel, you don't want to name names, but I'm going to name names. You know, we've had the State Farms of the world pull out. We've had other insurance companies that have expressly left the state due to our, you know, state's requirement that insurance companies not be able to write policies based on an area by area basis that accounts for the risk hazards that they're underwriting, which is, again, making us, as the state goes, the only state, one of the only states in the country that requires that. So again, our governance is failing us. If that changes, if the insurance commissioner changed that simple requirement, then more insurance companies would come into the state. They would be able to underwrite the risk for the hazards within the communities that they're electing to go into, which might mean that some of their policies might be expensive, but there will be more insurance companies coming back into the state. The more insurance companies come back in the state, the more competition there would be, and theoretically, that would push down the premiums on those policies. So you get more competition, and that more competition for the underwritings would cause the rates to come down. And again, sadly, it goes back to governance. I know we don't want to.
I mean, you're talking about governance, Joseph, and I'm, you know, Jamie Page from the West Side Current emailed me the after action review of the Woolsey fire incident that was produced 5 years ago, and it's, you know, it's a 220 page report. It's not exactly a page turner, but I've been going through it bit by bit. Just a lot of the stuff that was this report was commissioned for really highlights a lot of the things that happened during the Palisades fire. So again, you have, and this report was produced by the County of LA. County of LA, again, for the express intent of not repeating some of the same mistakes, I assume produced this report, probably paid a lot of money for it, probably did a whole bunch of investigation, put of bodies on it, and yet some of the same failings that we experienced during the Palisades fire, like, are literally part of this report. Utility companies, water shortages, environmental, you know, regulatory agencies, command, communication. Like, I can go on and on. Like, these failings that have repeated, you know, seven years after the original incident, and like, I think people are gonna just demand answers. Like, at the end of all of this, like, what's the point of having these people around if they're just not gonna follow any of their own advice?
I think we need something called, I don't know, either DOPE or DOME. We need either the Department of Palisades Efficiency or the Department of Malibu Efficiency. And part of it is we don't have, I know we had a czar allegedly to kind of look over, you know, how this was going to go through, but we just don't have, the efficiency of governance to, and really a voice, whether one or a unified voice of people, to really lead in an effective way to bring everything in line. And that's a sad part. I mean, Soboroff had some legitimacy until he kind of lost it, I think, when he said he wasn't getting paid. And perhaps, again, it goes up to the mayor's office for not really making his role one that was, you know, properly flushed out.
Elaine Clutie on the last podcast mentioned the idea of a PPP, a public-private partnership. I know you have some thoughts around this and how the Palisades can emerge from the rebuild on a governmental level. What do you feel about? What are your initial thoughts on like a PPP or do you think that the Palisades should break away? Do you think they should join Malibu or some other entity? What are your thoughts on this from a legal perspective?
Well, that's a really good question, Ron. And it's got so many layers to it. So one of the things that, and I think you and I, over the years being friends, we've talked about this, and we spoke about it more recently again, is that one of the things that's unique about where the fires ravaged and came through is you've got the Pacific Palisades on the one end, you've got Malibu on the other end. Our neighborhood, while we have a Malibu address, is kind of this tweener neighborhood between the Palisades and Malibu proper that is technically under the county of Los Angeles's governance. So we are not technically city of Malibu, and we're not in the city of Los Angeles. I think that it would be important for those who are, again, in this kind of no man land, have some ownership with their governance. I don't think being in a county environment is ideal. I think that to the extent that you've got a Malibu address, you should be a part of the city of Malibu. That's my personal opinion. As regards to the Palisades and the Palisades seceding, for example, from the city of LA, I just don't see that happening. I think that it was a failed attempt when the Valley wanted to secede from the city of LA a few years back for various reasons, largely having to do with loss of property payroll taxes. And it's no secret that Palisades is one of the most wealthy, from a property tax standpoint, enclaves of the city of Los Angeles that the city would be loath to lose as well. Now, is it possible? Or would that be a good thing? Let's just start from that. Would it be good for the people of the Palisades to form their own city? Perhaps. I mean, smaller towns perhaps govern better. They can, you would probably have to still farm out your services, such as fire to the county of Los Angeles, such as your policing to the sheriff's department.
What if Malibu took over Palisades? That's one idea people have had, that Malibu should actually annex the Palisades.
Do you think Malibu is operating better than?
I don't know, but it's at least more local and might be more responsive than people in LA. What's interesting? This is a bit of a side story, but there's a guy in Malibu who's a lawyer who goes around suing other cities to change their election system from an at-large system to a district system. He doesn't do it in Malibu, which still has an at-large city council, but he goes around suing everybody else.
Well,
I mean, Malibu reserves this form of government for itself that is, in theory, more responsive. Maybe it's better to be governed by people who collectively represent the whole city instead of this funny system where we are supposed to be represented by one city councilor and one supervisor, and all of these people are fighting for their particular areas, and we have to give up policing and fire, and we don't get the pre-deployed police and fire because maybe they go somewhere else or they do something else. I mean, I don't know. There's just an idea that it could be more responsive if it were closer to the people.
Absolutely. And look, I think I certainly would support that. And I think that a lot of people living in the Palisades would support that. I think the people who would not support that are people at the city hall of the city of Los Angeles. Again, something as simple as, by way of analogy, being that our children go to school in the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. And our school districts have been trying to secede so that Malibu would have its own school district, separate and aside from the city of Santa Monica. And not unlike what we're describing here, where you have property taxes, whether we're talking about the Palisades or Malibu, that are contributing to a large amount to the city of Los Angeles's property tax coffers. The argument was that the property taxes that were contributing to the school funds from Malibu were a very large contributor to the city of Santa Monica, and that if we Malibu students were to secede from the Santa Monica School District, that the Santa Monica students would fare poorly. Well, it's kind of part and parcel of the contributions that the parties are making to the pot, is my argument. And I think that to kind of keep an enclave as a part of the city of Los Angeles, because, you know, just because you want to have those property taxes, as opposed to having people kind of have their own say in terms of how they want to be governed, maybe by seceding. Maybe Palisades becomes its own city. It's on a standalone basis, not too dissimilar to the city of Santa Monica, or not too dissimilar to, you know, city of West Hollywood. I think people should have the right to say how they want to and wish to be governed.
Can I ask you just to take a step back? Since we're talking about all these legal issues, I mean, we have so much to cover, but what are the legal cases right now that you know of that are actually in court, where people are taking the LADWP to court, or maybe various different governments, maybe departments, companies, insurance companies? I mean, do we know enough about what cases are actually happening right now?
So I spoke to a dear friend of mine who's involved with litigating the Woolsey fires, and as it relates to the Palisades Malibu fires right now, it's a big game of wait and see for the reasons we talked about earlier, having to do with, you know, is Southern California Edison going to take culpability? Is the federal government going to put the blame on the utilities? And so the plaintiff's bar is really waiting and seeing to see, as relates to Malibu Palisades, the fires, whether that is going to come down the line, because that will make the plaintiff's bar's task really de minimis in terms of going after damages, because the strict liability statute being there. It becomes really just about damages and showing damages for each of your clients' circumstances. The Eaton fire is quite different, because the Southern California Edison culpability has already been assigned, so the liability is there. And so right now it's just about law firms, the plaintiff's bar for the Eaton fire, are just signing up as many families, households as they possibly can. It's been a bit more of a wait and see for a lot of the plaintiff's bar relative to the Palisades and Malibu, but they're very high profile plaintiffs that have lost their homes along Carbon Beach. I happened to be speaking at a conference about a month ago and ran into Grant Cardone, which you all know, and he has been trying to get, I think, a claim going against the city of Los Angeles, specifically, as I understand it. I don't really believe I understand his argument or his attorney's arguments yet. I think they're still formulating their thoughts around what the claim is going to become. But there are a lot of desperate individuals that are kind of going, and deep pocket individuals, I might add, who are going after various different theories, all of which will be consolidated at one point and will have to be, I think, and will be decided kind of, as I said, in a more collective manner. But again, the biggest firms with the most number of plaintiffs are going to be the loudest voice. It doesn't mean that those people are going to get the best deal, because those plaintiffs firms sometimes cut the best deal for themselves, not necessarily the best deal for their clients, but that's a whole other show.
So ultimately, you think there will be, cases regardless of, what the result that is found by the investigators is. You
Yes.
think, there will be cases.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
I know that on the Woolsey fire, we had Jamie over here on one of the pods, my neighbor, and he said that they went and they negotiated with like 4 of the biggest law firms, negotiated down to 21%, and then everybody chose whatever company they wanted. Any advice for us on this fire? Should we all come together and like talk to few companies and negotiate a percentage with them? How do you think we should like? Because I get a lot of questions, a lot of people asking me, should we join this lawsuit, talk to this firm, that firm? Should we
Yeah.
just stay and wait and like see what's rolling?
So I would say assess the plaintiffs' firms that you would be looking to sign up with based on a few things. One, the number of people that they've got signed up. And again, size matters, which is why I say that. Number two, their experience with the type of claims that are involved. Have they done things, whether it's with the Eaton fire in Altadena? Have they been plaintiffs in the Woolsey fire? Some of the attorneys that I know that are right now representing some of the plaintiffs have representation that, again, have had experience with the Woolsey fire. The next thing is really being mindful as to how you document your losses. When you're taking, it's easier in some ways if you've lost your home and you're, it's a whole loss, and the insurance company understands, and that's easy to document. It's actually harder if you're in a situation like Joel's or like myself, where your losses might be, partially covered, or you don't fully document those components that are not covered by your insurance company. So it's very important to retain as much documentation as to your total losses, so that if you do become a plaintiff in one of these claims, you've got documentation for those losses that were not covered and reimbursed by your insurance company.
Great.
Let me just start to close this really informative and interesting discussion by asking if there are any legal risks that people need to be aware of. If you have clients who live in the fire area, what risks that people might not even think are risks could they encounter?
Let me ask you, are you asking risks kind of ex post facto, or risks kind of with future fires, calamities, or are you talking about specific to the fires that we've sustained?
Well, I mean, let me just think of an example. I was in the Marquez Knolls neighborhood where I live today, and it occurred to me that you might have some kind of conflicts. Suppose you've cleared your lot, you're ready to rebuild. You've got a construction crew there, but your neighbors haven't finished phase 2. They're still removing debris. And let's say they've got excavators removing debris, and you've got a construction site, and whoops, an excavator knocks over the frame of your house, or there's debris that they dump onto one of your vehicles by mistake, or
Oh, Joel,
all
you
of the
just hit,
dust and ash getting kicked up affects your home. I mean, what goes on there?
I'll tell you, you just hit on something that's going to be, I call it kind of a 2.0 component. Right now, everyone's attention and focus is on getting kind of compensation from the people who did wrong by us, right? Who harmed you, right? But there's going to be a 2.0 portion where there's sadly, and I hope this doesn't really happen, and I hope we can remain a really tight-knit community, but there are going to be issues with survey lines. People are going to get surveys, they're going to find out, wait, a property line that they thought was a property line, properly setting, two neighbors apart, was not actually drawn correctly. Someone's fence was actually 2 feet, 3 feet over someone else's view line. By the way, there are no easements for views under the common law, but someone had a view forever at this property before their home burned down, but now someone's building maybe something slightly different and blocking your view. So you're going to be pissed off, and you're going to bring a claim for trying to be compensated for a sight line that you had. So I think that that's going to be potentially some of what will happen as a result of all of these rebuilds over time. And I think given some of the age of some of these homes, and when surveys were maybe a little bit less precise going back to the 20s, 30s, and 40s when some of these homes were built, going maybe to the 50s and 60s even, we'll find things, and people will not be happy about some things that they'll find. Some things might get rebuilt, and they might get rebuilt not to the exact specifications as to how they were, and some people might not be happy. So you got a lot of private lawsuits for sure.
How do you prevent that from happening if you're looking at rebuilding? Is that it's just a matter of like get an insurance policy that covers liability, things like that, or is it more? Yeah. Is there anything more tactical that you can do?
So some of the things that I would do is, again, those surveys. Number one, no matter what you're planning on rebuilding, get that survey. Get a really good survey. A really good surveyor will save your butt. Get that legal description, tightly done, so you know what you're in, where your playing field is. Aligning that with where your property was to the extent that you can get old blueprints, very, very important. If you can, go to the county. If you're part of Sunset Mesa, if you're part of Marquez Knolls, go to the city of LA. I've personally gone to the records department there, and I've pulled certificates of occupancy. I've pulled site plans. I've pulled blueprints in some cases, and it's well worth your effort to do that as a part of your investigation as you rebuild.
Great feedback. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Listen, this has been really very useful, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about some of these legal issues as we go. And Joseph, just want to give you the opportunity to tell us where we can learn more about what you do and follow you, perhaps on social media, or follow your legal work as well. Good time to put a plug in there.
Thank you, Joel. Joseph Soleiman, you can find me on Instagram. I teach at Pepperdine. I teach a legal issues class actually in the fall, which I'll be doing again at the business school at Graziato. And any of your listeners are welcome to come and sit and audit any of my classes. So happy to have you guys.
All right, well, that's it for Three Homeless Guys. Thank you all for listening, and email us your ideas, pod@threehomelessguys.com, and you can find us at threehomelessguys.com. We're on every platform just about for podcast as well as YouTube. And our next episode is going to be very interesting. We're going to have Supervisor Lindsay Horvath with us so we can ask her questions directly about debris removal, about what the county has been up to, how it gets along with the city. Some of these environmental issues fall to the county as well, including the state of the trails in Topanga and Temescal Gateway Park and so forth. So that's next time on Three Homeless Guys. And from Oren, Ron, and me, Joel, thank you all for listening. And let's stay strong, Palisades and Malibu.
Thanks for listening to Three Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out threehomelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@threehomelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.